Well, we'd like to welcome you here this evening or this morning or this afternoon or whatever time it is where you are. We're going to be looking at the second in the series of 15 Revelation teachings. And this is the world before the law. And Randal Hargrave has done this. This will be probably one of the shorter or easier of the sessions, as there wasn't a lot of content to it. And he didn't make a lot of comments that really warranted a whole lot of response. So I'm going to go ahead and get started with that. And we'll see where we go. With me tonight, of course, is Kelly Stoddard. And we'll be looking at essentially what is the return of the kings and the priest. The first point that was worth discussing is the COGR anti-Semitic? I've not belonged. I've only listened. Kelly, what do you think?
Well, it's an interesting question. They do make a lot of reference to the Jews, especially reference to the Jewish hierarchy. But they do seem to lump all of the Jewish people in on that. And then you kind of get some mixed messages sometimes from, well, I know you heard a message from Steve that I had sent you. But I think overall, it would be fair to say that they likely are.
So I noticed that there was a lot of protesting in this, that they certainly are not anti-Semitic. And I know that in another video, Steve goes to great lengths to make the point that he loves the Jewish people, but then he immediately turns around and talks about the Jewish people in a group as being the head of the dragon, so to speak. So yes. I think it's kind of hard for them to get away from the claim that they are, at least at some level, anti-Semitic. So here he says, I want to help you to know that you are still working, especially in our time, against the spirit of the dragon. The spirit of the dragon it's headed by the Jewish hierarchy, and it actually never stopped from the morning time. They've been chasing the Apostle Paul from the morning time until now. They've never stopped chasing. So that's an interesting claim. We know that dragons are, world systems or powers or that sort of thing. And the fact that the Jewish hierarchy is in charge of that is a claim that you might have seen in the Elders of Zion or something of that nature.
Yes.
They're controlling all the things behind the scenes. Well, anti-Semitism is prejudice, discrimination, or hostility directed against Jewish individuals, communities, or their religious, cultural, or ethnic identities. And since Randal tells us that the real problem is not heretical Protestants, is Jews, they are the real problem and where the battle is. That is an indictment of a whole race or an ethnic group. So as the saying goes, if it walks like a duck. So the belief that a shadowy Jewish cabal directs today's evil is the textbook definition of anti-Semitism. Randal Hargrave has demonstrated that he holds anti-Semitic ideas in spite of his protestations. It's essentially the Jews' fault.
And Randy says here, why couldn't the Greeks get anything? Because they weren't Jews in the sentiment of mind that we are the chosen people, even in the morning time. You're not Jewish. And although we can go along and say, that God shows no favoritism, he doesn't favor anybody else. That's fine, but we still are Jews.
So basically, I think that the group is interested in raising up the Gentiles and in some ways pushing down on the Jewish identity. And certainly you can't deny their claims that historically the Jewish people were enemies of Christians. They were in competition with Christians. That's simply true. The Jews were involved in the crucifixion of Christ, but that doesn't mean that we can afford to select the Jews as a group and lay blame on them for being that shadowy cabal that is ruling the world and causing great harm. It just doesn't make sense. Paul desired that all the Jews be saved. God loved the Jews. They were his children. It's a place to tread lightly.
And in terms of a Jewish shadowy a cabal, there would be Gentiles in that group as well. So you can't take the same brush and paint everybody with that brush. And that's essentially what they're trying to do.
Mhm.
Take a few people, bad people, whether they're Jews or whether they're Gentiles, but they're saying this is the Jewish cabal, and they're painting all of the Jews with that same brush.
Yeah. So Randal here tells us that Paul saved Christianity from Judaism, and he could have done that differently. He could have pointed out how Christianity rose out of Judaism. That's where it was given birth. He could have pointed to the fact that without Judaism, Christianity makes no sense. But instead, he sets up an antithesis. You have Judaism, and it's got to be Christianity has to be saved from that Judaism. And Paul didn't single-handedly save Christianity from Judaism. The initial community was Jewish, and then as time went by, Gentile communities were added, and over time, the Jewish cultural identity was shed because it was no longer a primarily Jewish group of people. But it wasn't like Judaism is the evil thing from which Christianity had to be rescued. Who leads us? That's kind of an interesting question, because in the COGR, it seems to be evident that the Roman papal system is something that Ray really appreciates. Basically, I remember him saying something to the effect of that they had the right system, but the wrong person was sitting on the throne. So they're always looking for ways to show that there needs to be control from the top. And what Randal teaches here, is teaching here, is going to be picked up again and again in the course of the series, because there needs to be a respect for that kind of leadership, that kingly leadership that they propose.
Yes, and they say that the papacy, that's what they had right, was the seat. But as you said, they said they had the wrong person sitting on it. They then say that Protestantism threw away the person on the seat and the seat with it. And that was their mistake. They should have kept the seat, kept the throne.
Yeah.
So they've now put themselves on that throne to exert their authority.
Yeah. So Randal wants to build a case then for a totalitarian leadership, which they believe is modeled on God's commands. And he says, I believe in looking to Jesus, but I don't believe that Jesus is alone. It's extremely important that we understand and that we get on the correct side of the correct prophetically correct entity that has not been taken in by the spirit of the dragon. That's a mouthful.
Here again is them, that's them saying you need to find yourself in prophecy, because they claim they found themselves prophetically.
Yeah.
So that's what he's alluding to there.
Yeah, and that the book of Revelation is written primarily about them, and basically Christianity is centered around them.
Yes.
So I got it, but it isn't Jesus alone. And every time that you get a group that starts vying to put somebody in Jesus's place, that really gets to be an issue. It is.
Yes. And I know last session we got together, I mentioned that they weren't the mediator. Of course, Jesus is the mediator between us and God, but the COGR apostles are attempting to put themselves in the place of a mediator between us and Jesus, or us and God, whatever they're trying to do with that, claiming to be Jesus here in the flesh. And by touching him, we're touching Jesus, touching God. They're trying to put themselves in that position of mediator.
So Jesus came, he had a number of disciples. Those disciples became his apostles. And those apostles remained when he ascended to be with the Father. But when they ascended, they never referred to themselves as saviors. They never assumed control for themselves. They always referred people to Jesus. So they perform miracles, which I might note that the COGR does not. They demonstrated the legitimacy of their ministry, which the COGR cannot. But in all of that, they were his apostles, his disciples, but they did not become the center of the ministry. They were a group of people pointing instead to Christ and calling people to him.
This is where the COGR differs by pointing people instead of to Jesus, they point them to Ray Tinsman.
Mm-hmm.
They refer to themselves as our saviors.
Now, cult groups have a habit of trying to claim authority based on an association in the past, and the Jehovah's Witnesses have a chart with different people that they say were their precursors, and other groups have done that very same thing. And then if you go to the COGR website, there are I don't know, 30 people, 40 people. I don't know. There are a lot of people in the supposed lineage, which
Yes.
all culminates in Ray. So they're trying to claim authority based on being part of the original true church, which would be an impressive claim if you could make it. Now, the JWs were clever enough to figure out that they couldn't ever successfully demonstrate a historical linkage to the past, and they stopped trying. So we're not there yet with the COGR, I don't think.
No, they're still trying, making that claim anyway.
Yeah. So we are a people that are from the beginning. We are a people of faith. Our lineage, our people, and our genealogy reach back to the beginning. That's impressive. That is. So if that's true, if they're making that same claim that other cult groups do, what do we think about it? Well, what goes back? Is it the group that has the association with the beginning? Is it one of the apostles in particular that has the association with the beginning? Is it Ray who has the association with the beginning? There's no way to know that. And there's no way for the group or any individual to demonstrate their lineage. It's absolutely impossible. Can you trace your lineage? How far back can you trace your lineage and be able to talk about what the belief system that surrounded the people that you're talking about was?
I can go back to my grandmother. That's as far as I can go back. And I know some history of my great-grandparents, but very little. That's as far back as I can go.
So you wouldn't be able to get back to Enoch and be able to talk about what was going on and what the beliefs were and that sort of thing?
I could claim that I do, but it would be a false claim.
Oh.
So no, I can't.
No, and they can't either.
No.
I mean, that's all it's just silliness, is what it is. But it's silliness with a point, because they want to be able to make that claim to authority. So it's a ruse, just simply a ruse. Oh, so why do we want to have kings and priests restored? And men have always had kings and priests, I might add. It isn't just within the Jewish realm. It isn't just within the Christian realm. Kings fulfill a role. They're basically the guy in charge, and priests are the religious guy in charge. It's throughout society, throughout cultures, and occasionally, as God is working, when he's working with a people, he might appoint a king or a priest. But it appears that it is now up to the COGR to appoint kings and priests. I don't see God in the midst of all of this.
They're self-appointed.
Self-appointed. So Randal says you can't build an altar, you can't offer a sacrifice for anything except you're considered a priest, okay? And actually, this priesthood, Noah was also considered a king. He was a king of the people that were on the earth at that time. So Noah, he was a king. I'll put this king priest of believers. Well, everybody who is a head of a family could be considered to be the king. I'm based on this. Anybody who is praying for the family could be considered to be a priest. If you want to talk about Protestantism breaking things up into small chunks, the idea here is simply that the person who's in charge was a king. Well, Noah was in charge, so therefore he's a king. And that doesn't tell us anything about today either. You can't say, well, Noah was a king, so therefore we need a king. And we would want to note, of course, that the Bible never explicitly states that Noah was either a priest or a king. That is speculation on behalf of the COGR. Now, there are commentators who have made that point, but that's when they're doing that, that's based on the idea that, well, the guy in charge is ultimately the king kind of thing. It's a definitional assignment versus that they're being assigned to be kings.
Yes, I was just going to say it would need to have their definition of what a king is.
Yeah. Yeah. But Randal's going to introduce this, and then the other people who are speaking are going to pick up on the idea of kings and priests, and we'll hear that a number of times as we go along, because the group really is autocratic or totalitarian in its, at least in its desire. They want to be kings, they want to be leaders. As is common to all of the series, scripture is often misrepresented, or exegesis is done in a way that isn't correct. So let's take a look at a couple of places where Randal makes some statements that perhaps we could say were incorrect. I don't know why he brought this up, but he said most people have the wrong idea of why Cain killed Abel. Cain killed Abel because he did not believe in the promise as it was given by his father. And this unbelief drove him to murder.
And I think one of the apostles, COGR apostles in Elmer, quoted that word for word behind the pulpit. And I remember hearing that and thinking, I didn't read that in scripture anywhere, that's why Cain killed Abel, because he didn't believe in the promise. I was quite confused when that was preached behind the pulpit.
So it says in scripture, Cain was very angry, his face was downcast. And notice that the Lord speaks to him. Then the Lord said to Cain, why are you angry? It's not his father, by the way, it's the Lord. Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must master it. So that doesn't seem to fit with what Randal is saying. And I guess in some sort of tangential way, you could say, and I have to think about how to do this. You could say, well, sin came into the world, and we know that eventually God's going to redeem us. So he must not have believed that God was going to redeem us, so he killed his brother. But that's really pretty tangential. I mean, that's not the issue at all. And we know that he knew it was based on his sin was based on his behavior. We know that God spoke with him, and yet he went ahead and he killed his brother because of his bad behavior, because of the evil that was in him, not because of his unwillingness to hear or believe in the promise.
I don't know where they're going with that. All that comes to my mind is the scripture in, I think it's 2 Timothy, where they say that men will turn from the truth and they'll turn to myths, because it seems that COGR just takes scripture and turns them into fables.
Yeah.
They make up stories.
And then this is kind of interesting also. We've heard of the sons of God and the sons of men. It's in Genesis chapter 6. So the question is, what is he talking about? He says the scripture says, and notice that he says specifically, the scripture says, then began men to call themselves by the name of the Lord. Or in the days of Enos, men began to call themselves by the name sons of God, as different from the sons of men. This is very important. Well, there are, if you exegete that section, there are a couple of different ways that can be understood, that passage. As he has spoken about it here, there's only one way that you can interpret it. He's basically removed any bifurcation. This is what you're going to believe, and he says that Scripture says that, but Scripture does not say that, and that's really the issue. There's apparently a reference in the margin note of the 1900 King James, and I'm not aware of any note being present anywhere else. I couldn't find a commentator, and I looked for a bit, who supported that position. The Hebrew text certainly does not support it, and the LXX, which is the Greek translation of the Hebrew text, doesn't support it. And there is no Bible translation that has been done that brings that margin note, that the idea that people begin to call themselves by as sons of God, anywhere. There's no Bible translation that's been done that does that. So Randal has misrepresented what the scriptures say. There's no way to get around that, I don't think. It's just a crappy job of trying to understand the Bible.
Are they trying to give themselves attributes of God by saying they're sons of God rather than sons of men?
I'm not really sure what the intent was.
Because I know in one of the messages, I'm not sure if it was Susan Much or Henry Hildebrand. I think maybe Susan. She's making a distinction between the sons of God and the sons of men.
Oh, yes.
Basically, kind of just what Randy was saying there, but it was unclear where she was going with that.
Right. And there, if you look at that in the context, the argument is, when you talk about the sons of man versus the sons of God kind of thing, were they talking about angelic beings? Were they talking about men? What is the meaning of the text? Because that gets into the whole sin thing and then the flood that follows. So
Right.
I would just like to, if I'm going to have somebody tell me something about scripture, I would like for them to stay close to the text, not to make it say something that it doesn't, because when they do that, then they corrupt it.
It was hard for me to distinguish whether they were trying to say, to split the group to those who believe in the Lord and those who don't, I wasn't sure if they were meaning it in that way, or if they're trying to give themselves some sort of divinity by saying, well, we are sons of God as opposed to sons of men. It was kind of unclear.
Yeah, and a number of the things that I have heard going through the series would require sitting down and discussing further with the person who's made the claims to get them to kind of fill out what it is they mean. But what you can take away from this is that it simply is not a good understanding of the passage. An apostle has just misrepresented scripture, is what it amounts to.
And then you have Stephen Hargrave, who says it's not their job to explain scripture to us. If we don't understand it, it isn't their job to help us understand. So
Yeah, well,
it doesn't really open the door
scripture.
for you to go and ask questions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's just you couldn't go to a Bible college and survive with that level of expertise. You'd be gone. And for a bonus slide, just in terms of language, because cults always try to control the language, and there's significance to the changes that they make. So I was going along and I saw the word pagan. Do you remember that, where he talks about paganism?
Yes, I remember the passage on paganism, and when we spoke about that briefly.
Yeah, so basically, if we fail to take in the gospel message that's being preached by the apostles in this time, that is, if we don't agree with the apostles, that qualifies and classifies those people as pagan. And then it goes on and says anything off of the prophecy. And I'm so tired of that. This prophecy thing is one of the dumber things I've heard. I've done the series, the whole stinking 15 hour and a half long lessons, and they never explain or make a case for the prophecy. There are basic prophecies that the entire Christian church understands to be prophecies, and they relate to Jesus and his coming. But whatever it is that the COGR thinks it's doing, they're just so far off base.
Yes, and I attended their services for 2 years. And once they stopped preaching about COVID, it was all about the line of prophecy and revelation. Line of prophecy and revelation, and lining yourself up with prophecy. And they would have some of the young brothers, they would line them up down the aisleway and basically just say, all we have to do, we can just turn around and we can see, D.S. Warner, and we see Abraham, and because when we turn around, we see all of these people, we're in line with prophecy. So they've lined themselves up. If you don't find yourself on that line, you're not saved. And I don't know if you heard the message or not, that was posted today. I heard it today anyway. Stephen Hargrave pretty much said if you didn't believe him, that you're now part of the LGBT community.
I did hear that. Why did I hear that? And I just heard that little bit. That's interesting.
Yes.
So, well, not everything always makes a lot of sense sometimes. But anyway, the COGR, when they determine that you become a pagan when you don't listen to their apostles, has made itself a reference point for evaluating all religions. Christianity looks at paganism, and it has a very specific definition for paganism. But they have grabbed that definition. They have said, oh, no, it's us and us only. And if you don't believe in us, that everything outside of us is pagan.
Yeah.
Again, that's just a way that people who control the language can often win the argument. So you have to be careful when people start changing terms. You have to be very careful to define, and you also have to kind of be careful to smile and simply say, no, that's not true, when dumb things are said. So that's what we have for that first or that second in the series. That was, without question, the shortest of these lectures in terms of content. And there were a few things to comment on, but it wasn't nearly as interesting as some of the ones that are coming up, where there's a lot of theological jetsam, flotsam, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. But interesting, though, to see how they have a lot of parallels with Jehovah's Witnesses in
Yes.
terms of taking a scripture out of context and giving it their own meaning. Only Jehovah's Witnesses create their own literature to go with that. The Church of God doesn't do that. They just simply say it. You need to believe it.
Yeah. Yeah, and Jehovah's Witnesses change language, they add language as they need to, and this group also does. If you're going to read the scripture, and that's the one thing that all people who follow Christ have in common, then you should at least be honest enough to read the scripture honestly and exegete it so that your meaning lines up with the meaning of the people who first read it. I mean, that's not an unreasonable expectation at all. And many times people in the COGR make comments that simply would be unintelligible to the original audience.
Yes, and I would encourage people to read the Bible on their own without any supplemental material at this point, because growing up as a Jehovah's Witness, Bible was just a secondary book to read, just supplemental to all of their main material. And that really does skew your understanding of scripture, because you don't actually read it in its entirety. And the Church of God essentially does the same thing. They'll take a scripture out and they'll twist the meaning of it, and that's what you're left with. Yeah. So I really encourage people, when I actually sat down and read the Bible in its entirety on my own, just with prayer, it was amazing, the light that came to me. And then you could hear all of the things that the COGR was saying that didn't line up with scripture. So I just read that. That's not what it said. So I really encourage people to just sit down, have a prayer to the Lord, and then open the Bible and just read it.
All right, so we'll bring this to an end. Soon we'll be doing session 3. I believe that is Stephen Hargrave. That is definitely an interesting session, and I think you'll find it very interesting and probably enjoyable. So we look forward to seeing you back then. Kelly, you want to close? Anything?
Just again, if you have any questions, please feel free to contact either myself or Lee. We'd be more than happy to either speak with you or return an email, whichever will work best for you. We're here for you.
Yeah.
Disappointment is a bitter pill to swallow, paying back the hope I borrowed from someone I never knew. And it's a forfeit, humans in the suits of heroes, undressed by whispered conspiracies, in quest for truth. But if the truth is what you're looking for, you don't get to choose the answers anymore. So tell me, do you really still believe that the truth will set you free? I do. Someday, well, if the truth